In this phase of my book, I'm supposed to bring something as far as a visual aid to help enhance the message that I'm trying to convey. And I can assure you it's not this. I wanted to bring something that would be special to each and every one of you. Something that would note a precious time in a different phase of your life. But I didn't need to bring it, because all of you brought it for me. So at this time, I'm going to do something a little bit unorthodox. I'm going to ask everybody that doesn't have a role to play, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. I can assure you, I'm no magician. I'll still be in a straitjacket and locks and chains when you open your eyes. But if you could, please, I'm asking you to take this moment and just close your eyes. Do you remember how great your conversations were before you owned a cell phone? Do you remember how useful your hands used to be before they held one? Do you remember being absorbed by looking at the beautiful images in the vast sky instead of being amazed by a 2.4-inch cell phone screen? Do you remember when an apple was a nourishing fruit and not just a symbol of consumerism? Do you remember when you didn't need a website to keep track of who your friends were? Do you remember when the most extreme form of cosmetic surgery was getting an unwanted mole removed? Do you remember when a Barbie doll was just a children's toy and not a standard for beauty? Do you remember when 16 channels were more than enough? Do you remember when you would look for reality by looking out the window and not into a television screen? Do you remember when you were more inclined to play a sport than to rush home to watch someone else do it on television? Do you remember when the only pill you would take was a Flintstone vitamin? Do you remember when there wasn't a convenient acronym for what was wrong with you, so you just called it stress? Do you remember when staying at home was your parents' way of punishing you because you hated being home? Do you remember when you only needed the things you only need? Do you remember spending money you actually had? Do you remember when fun wasn't so expensive as long as you had a great imagination and good friends around you? Do you remember eating when you were justifiably hungry and not just because you were bored? Do you remember when you were more inclined to chase an ice cream truck down the street than chasing the American dream? Do you remember the only time you pretended to be something you weren't was because you knew you were just pretending? Do you remember being a slave to your instincts, not your paycheck? Do you remember being so honest with your emotions that you cried when you were sad, yelled when you were angry, and were willing to show weakness in time of struggle? Do you remember when people were more inclined to give you a hug than their business card? Do you remember when people were more concerned with their own life than celebrities? Do you remember how driven you were before you ever held a steering wheel? Do you remember a time in your life when money was only the basis of your decisions because it was a flip of a coin? Do you remember when the rain would turn the world into a giant water park instead of a dreary excuse to stay inside? Do you remember when you weren't so afraid of everything for nothing? Do you remember when honesty didn't require so much effort and lying didn't come so naturally? Do you remember when you were more concerned with finding the source of the pain instead of just finding something to swallow and make it go away? Do you remember when you could think about the future with a sense of hope, not anxiety? Do you remember when you didn't feel so broken? so much trouble sleeping, and waking up requires so much coaching. Do you remember looking in the mirror every morning and completely and wholeheartedly loving what you saw? See, sometimes to remember, you have to forget. Forget how many footsteps you've invested in a path that's not taking you anywhere. Forget the lies you've told and the facts you have to keep straight because they're not really facts. Forget how many times you've tried and failed, how many shouldn't, couldn'ts, and wouldn'ts you've heard. Forget the mistakes that you've made. Do you remember where you were standing the last time you stood for something? Open your eyes. Not just in this moment, but in every moment. Open your eyes. We're chained. We're locked. Chained by the fear to look like everyone else. And chained by the desire to gain everyone else's approval. And it's locked us into heavy credit card bills to be the haves and the need to have mores. Chained and locked, and sometimes we feel just as crazy as I probably look right now. Chains and locks in every phase of our life. Looking for the key to happiness, prosperity, joy. But the key is within all of you. And the chains that you carry, as heavy as they are only there because you choose to carry them. If you're willing to let go, you can go within, or you can continue to go without.